Welcome everyone. Great to have you back here. Happy Wednesday or Tuesday. I always think it's really fun watching the difference in between autumn and spring. We've got another lovely spring day. It almost feels like summer. We're looking forward to thawing out and getting to the beach again. Yes, anyway, focus and maintaining focus. This is probably one of the largest challenges, and one of the things that most parents come and talk to me about, that kids get distracted all the time, that they just can't get started on things. And Dr. Kay and I were just talking about this because this is like a higher order of executive functioning. There are some things in place. The working memory, wasn't it, Dr. K? Working memory, inhibition control,
and what's that? Flexibility.
Yes. They're almost like the basics. They're the ones that you have to build on first before you can really have success in this area. Would you agree with that?
Yes, for sure, because you need to be able to remember what you're thinking about to focus, right? So you need the working memory to focus and use the information in your memory in order to process what's going on with you. You need the inhibitory control to maintain your focus and not get distracted by the things around you. And you need the cognitive flexibility to be able to consider the different options and saying in your self-talk, okay, I can focus on the task at hand, or I can let myself get distracted by whatever it is that the distraction is.
So, that's all that metacognition as well, thinking about thinking, and that really needs to be modeled a lot. And developmentally, I think you really have to adjust your expectations around that and scaffolding. Thanks for changing that over. Because, asking a 5-year-old and trying to help a 5-year-old improve their focus is probably not going to happen unless you've got all these other things in place. So there's always a bit of a crossover, isn't there, with the executive functioning and the types of strategies that you'll see here.
Yeah, well, and when it's most appropriate to work on them, and when you can really scaffold in the support that they need, especially at the younger ages. And knowing that, okay, well, this isn't the time where we're really going to be able to work on that focus. Executive functionings are something that our brains are naturally pre-wired for. So it's not something like reading that's a man-made skill. This is something that we are pre-wired to develop if given the right circumstances and the right opportunities. So we need to make sure that we provide those opportunities for people to develop these skills and do them. But when we have our exceptional learners, this development is often lagged, right? So students that, or individuals that would normally, if they were neurotypical, would start developing these skills at age 5, it can be as late as age 10 for our exceptional learners. And executive functionings are that continue to develop until, mid-adult, early adulthood. So for a typical achieving individual, it's going to be about the age of 25, whereas an exceptional individual, in their 30s, they're still working on developing those executive functioning skills. And
I'd say my wife would say it's for about 52.
Yeah, they do continue to develop throughout the lifetime, and you can get supports in them. Yes. But it's very common to have these skills not apparent. And if children aren't given the support to develop them, and teens aren't given the support to develop them, then they're going to have that deficit. And that's why Simon's done an amazing job at creating these graphics for ways that we can help support them.
I'm just noticing there's maybe some troublesome sound. So could I ask you to investigate that a little bit
If you work on this talking part, I'll work on trying to figure out why the sound's not working.
Okay. Well, I was going to go into what it might actually look like in the classroom, or perhaps if you're a parent, what it may look like in the home too. Um, and yeah, well, so we're talking about focus and not just engaging, but once the kids have kind of engaged, you might hear things like, I'm bored, this is taking forever, why do I have to do this anyway? You know, am I ever getting, you know, perhaps for some of those older students, you know, how am I ever going to use this? Will I ever use this in my life? Sometimes it's actually about, where do I start? This, you know, this is going to take forever. But one of the things I say to teachers when I'm mentoring teachers too is it's not just once or twice that this happens. It's the frequency, the timing of it, and the kind of depth of feeling. So, you know, some people might say, oh, but all kids say that. Yeah, but kids who consistently say it all the time, task after task, different subject to different subject, that's probably a red flag for you, that they're just not getting or they're being challenged by the whole thing. It can look like a non-completion of tasks where you go, oh, they start off really well, really excited about it. They're going to do this and they're going to do that. And it just doesn't come together. Sometimes the ideas that they have are just so big, perhaps grandiose and fantastic, that what they're actually doing doesn't match what's inside their head. And that can be frustrating too. It can be the kid that, you know, does start off excited but just doesn't deliver in the end, and you're kind of scratching your head and wondering how come that didn't happen as well. And you know, it can be the daydream.
Well, and it can also be that executive functions are also one of the first things that are affected when we're stressed or fatigued, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if this child is not getting a proper sleep, if there's a stressful event going on at home, these are all things for you to consider, because that can be telling you why they're particularly struggling that day. So you want to see whether this is a ongoing trend or if it's a situational situation. So someone who normally has a really good handle of some of the organization and the ability to focus, if they suddenly can't, then that's a red flag to look into what the deeper problem is. Why, for some reason, has this skill left? And that's, as an educator, you want to look into what's really happening with this child. I mean, everybody has good days and bad days, but if the student's consecutively having a couple bad days and you want to know why, you really need to look a little bit deeper. It's not just because they can't focus, and it's not just because they're bored, right?
Yeah, consistency, frequency, I suppose intensity too is the guide mark. Yeah, I've also seen it, you know, kids leave things to the last minute, you know, sometimes, but these kids really leave it to the last minute. And across subjects and across different days, it's all about that consistency, frequency, but they sometimes do it because they get addicted to that rush. They need that timeline to provide the dopamines and the neurotransmitters to get them motivated to actually get it done. So often they're the last minute kids too. Would you agree with that as well? Yeah.
I don't think it's just kids that suffer from that issue.
I think Jessica McCabe has great videos.
Right? Finishing things as you absolutely have to. And it's a matter of scaffolding in the support so that they learn that they can still get that, you know, that excitement of having it done early and on time and having it just off the stressor. And that can be really difficult to facilitate and encourage, right? But there are ways to help with that. And it's all about picking the most important battle at the moment, right? and deciding what the best skill to focus on. With executive functioning, you can't focus on all of these skills at the same time, because
No.
that's just going to lead to like a domino effect, right? You need to pick an area to focus on and work on them. You can still use the other supports like the visual schedule or other strategies, but know when you're focusing on one, just try and focus on one skill, because then you're not allowing the child to focus and maintain their focus on the skill you're working on developing.
Yeah. I think that's time, isn't it?
Yeah.
Time to absorb it, develop a command of it, and experiment with it and learn from it. Yeah. Time, it's so precious. Oh, and that brings me back to the Pomodoro technique. We must explain sometime. It's in the next one, I think, but it's probably relevant here, and perhaps you can explain it later on. Well, what we might do then is I'll start sharing this screen, and I'm going to share the graphic here. Share, and then we can talk to it. How's that going? Oh, there we go. Just going to make it, just increase the size of the screen.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit easier for everyone to see. Come on, computer. Keep up. You can do it.
Good computer.
There we go. Good computer. You did it. Maybe I've got a few too many tabs open. that would happen too. Okay, so this is a 5th out of 7. Okay. All right, so let's launch up here to movement activity before a session requiring continued focus. So I actually often build this into when I'm working with clients, and we have an afternoon study session. I tend to talk to kids about, okay, well, to parents as well, let them eat, drink, don't talk to them. But if they can do a little bit of exercise just before their study session, you know, it can be planks, it can be walking a tightrope, climbing a tree, bouncing on the trampoline. They come in, they settle into their study space, they have a quick drink of water, and during that time, you've still got a flood or a tidal wave of endorphins flowing through your system, and that can be enough to actually stimulate your brain into just starting. And sometimes that can give you the focus, and we're talking about things that kids don't want to do. You know, things they do want to do, that's okay. It's hard to get them to stop, but it's getting them to it. So if you set that up in the beginning, they start, and often just starting is actually probably all they need. I do say though, if it is something that they're straining to do and they're just doing 15 minutes at a time because that's as much as they can do, after 15 minutes, have another break, have a physical break, do some planks, jump outside, you know, move around, and then come back in, do another 15 minutes. And that might be just enough to get them through or do what it is that they need to do. So, yeah, how does this translate in the classroom? I do English after recess.
Well, and doing those brain gym movement breaks, right? Or getting them to do the tactile, touching all their fingers, the cross midline activities where they're touching their elbow to their knee, a couple things like that. You know, stretching, touching the sky, touching the floor, just doing a little bit of that right before you try and get focused, especially on some of those activities that require more concentration. And the thing to consider is that all of your students have different strengths and topics that they are, you know, really interested in. So while, you know, 5 students need this sort of thing before class, or, you know, before art class, others need it before social studies or language arts, mathematics. So you can even build it in, you know, some students aren't going to need it, saying, okay, if you need your brain break, you take it now while we're transitioning between activities, and you can stand at your desk and have, you know, the accepted ones that you teach in at the beginning of the year, scaffolding, and then say, okay, now it's time for your brain break. or your brain gym. And while you're transitioning to the next activity, instead of them sitting at their desk waiting, you know, talking to their neighbors or whatever happens, they can just be doing a couple of those activities. And you can even appoint one of the more active students that really requires this to be the leader during this, right? And say, okay, we have 5 minutes, put it on your visual timer if you have like a time timer or something. Up here, most classrooms have the smart boards. And I'm pretty sure there's an app that you can get to do that visual timer so that they can see the countdown for the, you know, the 3 minutes of activity between the subjects.
Oh, look, there's so much there that you hit on that I went, oh, yes, I wanted the whole brain gym stuff, the perceptive kind of movement activity is just so important, because I really believe, and that's why I love occupational therapists, that good movement is healthy brain development. And if they've got control, an impulse control over their physical body, then we can transfer that into their cognitive thinking as well. So I don't think you can do enough kind of that brain gym and perceptive stuff. I also think this is an opportunity too. And I've done this in my kindergarten classes. I said, look, if you need a brain break, you can go choose to have one if you want to. And what I did, I had this all boys kindergarten class. This is just awesome. A million years ago, I think it was one of the highlights of what I've done in my career. But we painted a track around the sandpit just outside the classroom, and the kids could go out there whenever they wanted to, or if they felt they needed to. So of course, all these kindergarten boys, you know, would run out there all the time doing it. But after a while, it settled down, and it's a bit like fidget spinners. You know, you get the crest of overuse, and then it settles down to the people who really need it. But love that kind of stuff. Even sitting down and doing some core work, like just balancing on your bottom for 45 seconds. You know, or challenging the whole class to do it too. But you're quite right, you don't want to interrupt the whole class, but if little kids can start learning to self-advocate for themselves, saying, I need this now, then that's sensational. That's a start of self-regulation, and you know, and being aware of themselves and the metacognition too. Anyway, good on you, Dr. K. You got me all excited about those things. I'm so glad you mentioned that.
Well, and there's like the wiggle seats. Some schools up here have the sensory hallways where they have a path where kids have to, you know, jump on the lily pads, and they have different things to do. And also even just like a TheraBand, one of those exercise bands tied between the chair legs to give them something to fidget. And don't insist that they have to sit down during the lesson. I remember during my graduate work, there was a student in the class that, you know, she self-advocated to the prof saying, look, I need to stand up and sway while I'm taking this information in. It's how I best learn. If I am sitting down, I'm not able to focus. But I'm not going to cause a fuss. And that's one of the things that you can say. I'm giving you this right or this special trust between you that you can be responsible in using this. And it's a right that I can take away if you aren't. If you're abusing the privilege, you lose the privilege, right? So if you are able to do this on your own while I'm teaching and you need to do that, I'm going to let you do it. But if you're going to be disruptive to the class, then you can't. I'm sorry.
Look, and that brings us down to this next point too, allowing a child to fiddle or draw while listening to instructions. Sometimes kids need that stimulus to really focus. Often when I see kids fiddling, you know, in my workshop, the parents will say, oh, stop that. And I go, no, that's okay. Actually, I take that as a compliment, because the kids are self-soothing. They're trying to do that movement in an appropriate way to pay attention to what's occurring. And I think that's just so very important. And then parents kind of go, oh, well, hang on a minute. The same thing in class too. I often talk about calling these things fiddle tools and not fiddle toys. And it's a tool to help you. Sometimes there's overuse, but the ones you really need it will stick to it as well. So if my kind of rule in the classroom was, if you're looking at it and wondering what it can do, then other people are looking at it as well, and that's stopping us from learning. So it had to be in your lap, and you still had to be having some eye contact or interaction with what the actual lesson, but it could still be in your hand as well. And that goes to those weighted toys. That can really, really help as well. And again, you know, people say, well, how come they can have that and my child can't? And we come back to the conversation you've just got to have with your class and the parents, that fairness is about getting what you need to succeed. It's not about all getting the same thing. And you illustrated that in that last point that we had too.
Well, if your child needs it, there's no reason why your child can't have it. But if your child doesn't need it, why are we adding this extra thing? And I was just going to add a personal anecdote to this. And so I am severely dyslexic, and I have, you know, executive functioning issues. And I know throughout high school, one thing that I needed when I was doing my homework is to have music in the background. And there are a lot of parents like, oh, you're not concentrating. But my parents learned that that was that part of my brain that needed the distraction could listen to the music. And then I could really get into it and focus. And I could be doing, you know, complex mathematics or computer coding or statistics. But if I didn't have it, I couldn't focus on my work. And it's understanding the individual needs and not just applying a blanket statement. No, you can't do this.
Yeah, right? Yeah, absolutely right. What is the big important battle here?
Yeah.
You know? It's a bit like kids with headphones too. Sometimes when we have autistic kids with headphones in large groups, that's okay. But I think you can have that in the classroom, but having music can actually help focus. So often I say, yeah, let them have some music while they're doing it. It doesn't work for everyone.
They're going to sing a song and jump up and dance, right? You're not going to throw on
of course. Yeah.
Baby Shark or you know, the flossing song, or you know, Macarena, YMCA. You're not going to do those ones. You're going to do soothing classical music, piano, jazz, something like that. Yeah. And something that they're not, you know, they're not going to sing along to. I mean, even if they sing along to and, you know, tap along to it while they're doing the work, that's okay. But you don't want them to be focusing on the music more so than the work. And you can say very simply to them, well, if you're doing that, then you're going to lose that privilege.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you know what? That leads, there's a nice segue into the next point, which is limit distractions. Now, when I first put this up in my group or around, and I was saying pardon me because that was a phone and no other reason. The other, someone said, hang on, how can you allow a child to fiddle and draw while listening to instructions, but limit distractions at the same time? So those last two are really about providing the brain with the stimulus and the dopamines that they need to interact and not stay bored. But the limit distractions, it comes after we've actually got them on task. Now, I don't mean simply just put them up the front of the room, you know, and I see so many psychologists just put them up the front of the room. But in fact, especially with our older kids, they don't want that because it takes away from their social kind of currency. They don't want to be up the front of the room. But there are lots of things to do. Now, I know some schools have taken this the wrong way and put kids up the back or put kids outside the classroom or even taped spaces around classes, around the child's seat. And in some ways, is that segregation? And it is, really. In some ways it is. The difference is choice. If the child has a choice to be there or to interact, then it's not. So that's why it's so important for these kids to be able to advocate for themselves. Going, I am getting distracted. Perhaps I should just sit up in the back of the room and just focus on the task. Then it's not, I suppose. And then you kind of go, well, hang on. Making a child sit up the front is almost akin to that as well. So it's choice, but limiting the distractions is something like, turning off the phone in the home, putting it to the side, or that tree forest growing thing where you don't touch the app and it grows a forest. I love that one. I can share a link for that one as well. The limit distractions also happens to be, a systemic thing as well. In our schools where we've been, sometimes you just have intercom messages and you have one, then you have another teacher do one, and sometimes you can have 12 interruptions. If you can organise a way to have all those interruptions at one time, just before recess or just after recess or just during an assembly or something, that's the kind of limit distractions that we want. For instance, if you've got a younger child and you send them to get something from their tray or their book bag somewhere else in the classroom, then all of a sudden they've got an opportunity to look out the window, pass somebody by, get distracted by another conversation, accidentally elbow somebody, and they're off task. If you've got their books there and they're ready to go, their pencils are sharpened, the books are there, they know what to do, they've got their instructions perhaps on their desk, that's the kind of limiting distractions. The distractions, they can be destructive. I suppose what I've learned by being in corporate Australia kind of lately is that we don't look at the user experience as teachers. When I go back into the classroom, and when I'm working with parents as well, I'm now looking at the user experience. What's it actually like for the child, or what is it actually like for the parent? I think teachers can learn a great deal from corporate Australia too, or corporate organisations.
Also looking at, having those quiet spaces that completely limit the distractions, not just for one student in particular, right? Make them available to your entire class, because there are going to be some times when other kids in the class are going to want that, right?
Yeah.
They just need that extra security or extra support in focusing on the task at hand. And depending on your relationships with some of the students in your class, you can say, look, I know you don't need this, but can you today for me, please go work in there to show to your classmates that, there's no reason why, right now in this point of time, you just want to have some space to work there as a change of scenery and a chance to focus. And I remember it made me think of Shelley Moore talking about inclusion and talking about how in one of the schools she was working on, and they had a segregated classroom, and then they decided, okay, well, we're going to be inclusive and we're going to have the segregated classroom in our assemblies. And well, that wasn't really inclusion either, because there's the students that can't handle the assembly. So they're like, okay, so it's optional for you to go to the assembly. But if it's too loud, you can sit in the hallway. Well, then some of the mainstream students are like, well, you know what? I find it really loud and I'd actually rather be in the hallway where it's not as stimulating. So that's more of the model of making it say, you know what? Everybody could benefit from this little study carrel or the ability to move their work somewhere else than where they normally sit because of any number of reasons on any given day.
Absolutely. I love the trend here. I'm not too sure if you've got it over there, but flexible classrooms, flexible arrangements, where
COVID, everything's a little bit not so flexible.
Yeah.
With social distancing requirements.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing that we need to be considerate of in this time, while there are a lot of best practices that we'd love to employ, given the current circumstances, they're not feasible.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. All right. They are. Limit distractions. Okay. Break tasks up into smaller chunks. Okay. Well, this is actually a really important skill for kids to develop as they move along too. But you can model that as well. I know when we've been learning, tables and trying to get that mastery of learning tables, if you presented a child with the whole A4 page of tables and questions, they would probably go, no, it's just too much. What do I have to do all this? But if you cut it down into just 2 strips or 1 activity or 1 line, that makes it much more manageable. And then they're likely to get engaged and get focused, knowing it's only going to last a minute or 2. So I suppose what this comes down to is also good learning. There's a great book called 12 Rules for the Brain. And we know that large chunks of learning isn't, and cramming isn't effective as small, repeated chunks done at various times as well. So it can actually be a better way of studying. Instead of just doing 50 multiplications, you do 10 one day and do 10 another day. It's actually strengthening and building the synapses in the brain. So it's probably better teaching and better learning, I think.
Well, and it's building that connection, right? Is thinking about building a walking trail, right? And
yes.
Right? The more and more that you walk on it, the more worn it's going to be, so the easier it's going to be to find in the future.
Yes.
Right? When we look at the individualized education plans, and we're talking about goals and objectives, at least up here, goals, the big concept. And the objectives are those little steps that we're taking to meet that goal. Or, how do you eat an elephant? Well, you eat it 1 bite at a time. So teaching them how to make those chunks. And first you start out by doing it for them, and then you involve them in the process, and then you remove the scaffolding so they can start doing it themselves. One way that I like to advocate doing this is through bullet journaling.
Yes.
And learning how to break the task into smaller chunks, and then just assigning those little chunks. And even, if you get some graph paper and they, draw a thermometer, like those donation trackers, right? And then every time they get to a certain point, they can fill in a box, and they can visually see the progress that they're making to reach their final goal, right?
Yes. Yeah. Making it visual, great idea.
Yeah.
You should add that to the next version.
Sounds good.
All right. Yeah. So breaking tasks up, you're right. You need to do it for them. Then they've got to have some say over it. Then they've got to do it themselves, and perhaps fail safely before they really learn that task. And by failing safely, I mean, it's a chance to look at a growth mindset and go, okay, well, that didn't work. What can we do next time to make sure it works?
Mm-hmm.
So I suppose, explicitly teaching and modeling what it is to focus.
Yes.
Yeah. And I love playing games for that.
Yeah.
Lots of games, Jenga, and that focus when you're there in that moment. If you're actually teaching a game, that's what focus is, then that's what we want you to replicate as well.
Well, and even things like Taboo, I don't know if that's a game there, right?
Yes.
They have to be conscious about not saying a certain word. They have to focus, but they have to describe that word, and I'm horrible at this game because I always put out the word. And just giving them the opportunity to focus and, trying to balance or, the different challenges that you can do with that, and, walking with a book balanced on your head for your posture.
Dusters. Yes.
Yeah, or trying to balance things on your finger, or with a badminton racket, just hitting a birdie, or a tennis racket, bouncing the ball, right? Focus
Absolutely.
on that. You have to be so concentrated on what you're doing to succeed.
Yep. Yeah.
I suppose some people don't, but they're at the pro level, so.
Well, look, and that brings us back to that perceptive work, walking along a line forwards and backwards. That takes focus.
Yeah.
And if you can transplant that or make that real, that focus you were doing before, that's what we want to see. And that's what we're going to, catch you doing, hopefully. And that's the kind of thing you need to finish this task.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm going to, I'll share the screen again. I'd just like to go backwards and forwards every now and then. But I'm going to go up to the top. Allow a child to investigate and demonstrate learning, probably a much higher order tasks, usually with my high school kids, where they don't want to get engaged. Sometimes it's that whole theory of mind where they expect you to, and that cognitive inflexibility, where they kind of expect you to know what is actually in their head, and they don't know why they should have to actually express it to you if you already know that, because they're assuming it. But also, if they're doing, if you've got a diagnosis of ODD, an oppositional defiance disorder, then having some collaboration or having some say is just so important. So again, it's the big battle. If you can give the child a choice of how to present this information, it may not be the ideal way, it may not be the same as everybody else, but they're moving through the content and they're presenting it. And maybe next time, when they do feel more confident, they will present it in, or step towards presenting it in the way that the rest of the class is, so they can develop those skills. Yeah, it's picking your battles, but I think it's important for teachers to remember too, that sometimes these challenges that the parents and the kids are facing, they're not so focused on the academic results. They're focused on just trying to get their kids through the school experience. And, it's the effort that they want to see, not always the end result. And parents are often, quite flexible, going, you know what, I'd rather they just engage it and learn it. It doesn't matter if they can't be assessed on it, as long as they've engaged with it. So it's that battle, what's really important. And I think you'll find with parents, especially informed and parents who are advocating, that they're more concerned on the bigger picture in making sure their children have got a healthy self-concept, a good self-esteem, and really get through the school experience.
Right. Well, and then as a teacher, you need to ask yourself, what is the goal of the assignment, right? Yep. You need to be willing to say, what am I trying to assess in this particular situation? Am I trying to assess their knowledge, which typically is what you're trying to do, or am I trying to assess their skill for doing an activity to represent their knowledge, right? So for some children, focusing to write an answer in a testing situation isn't, unless you're testing them on their ability to write a sentence and their grammar, is it really giving them the best opportunity to show what they know? No, it's not. You need to say, okay, well, are they going to be too hyper-focused on worrying about grammatical structure and punctuation and their spelling in order to not show me what they actually do know? Whereas if I let them list it in point form or give it to them orally, they'd be able to give you this beautiful, long-winded answer that has so much more than they possibly need. But the way that I'm asking them to show their knowledge, they're not able to focus on showing me their knowledge. Their focus has to be somewhere else. So as teachers, we now need to readjust our mindset and look what the goal of the activity is. And if it's assessing whether the child can write an essay, sure, that can be your focus on the assignment, and you're going to accept that this child's not going to exceed. But if you want their ideas about the topic and them to write or to create that persuasive argument, why can't they do that in a PowerPoint presentation or a slideshow, or talking about it and doing a debate, right? And presenting their opinions that way.
Oh, absolutely. Claymation, memes, they can do it in so many different ways, but you're absolutely right. What is the big battle here? What do you want the kids to really learn? I suppose there's also the point that, why should teachers be that flexible, and why should they present that? Because a child's going to engage. And that's the ultimate thing, is you want them to be able to do that as well.
And you want them to feel success,
yes.
Right? It's so frustrating to a child who knows the information, knows what you're talking about, and wants to show you, they want to show you how smart they are. They want to please you. But the way that you're asking them to do it is directly measuring an area that they're weak in.
Yep.
And so
Absolutely.
it makes them feel even stupider, right? And it's horrible for their self-worth. If you're able to say, look, you know what? I know you know this. I want you to show me how you know this. And we can do that differently. And these are the options. Or, come up with a way that you think you could best show me this information, and you'd be amazed what they create. And absolutely. Again, I think back to my, my graduate school, and for a couple of the courses that I had with this one professor, she said, your final project is worth 60% of your final grade. You tell me what it is.
Oh, wow.
You have to show me your knowledge on this. I have to approve it, but you get to create how you want to show me your knowledge. And that's, especially with how the world's becoming a lot more technologically friendly and all the different ways that we're sharing our knowledge. Yes, I'm not going to deny that we need to focus on the literacy and the written aspect. That is something that all students need to know and need to learn. But it's not something that, if it's not the focus of the lesson, that we necessarily need to hammer on, right? If you know that that's a particular area of challenge for this student, why are you making them do it over and over again and having them get low grades and horrible self-esteem and resenting the work when they could be loving it and showing you what they know, having more buy-in and learning more and getting more from the experience, because they're able to show you what they know in a better way.
Yep, absolutely. I suppose there's 2 points to that too. It's, these kids don't have emotion. Well, they're working on developing their emotional control, and they just don't tolerate boredom, a lot of them, and they like to go. They've got a Ferrari brain, and they've got bicycle brakes, as the quote goes. And they just, it's kind of inhibiting them. And there's, what's the big picture? The other piece around there, when they've got that, what I want to say was that because they can't harness those emotions of boredom, then sometimes it just leads into a perfect storm. That whole perfect storm, that whole perfect meltdown can be avoided by giving choice. A lot of the kids I work with, and I'm sure you do too, if they've had ADHD for a while, they're starting to develop an anxiety around that. And some kids come to me and they've already got anxiety. And sometimes that's performing as well. They know the stuff, they just can't always, or they don't believe in their own ability to express it too. So actually performance can actually be a real trigger for them as well. So this is one way around it. I'm just looking at the time there too. I'm just looking at the next point, create a list of steps. That's just so much like your bullet points, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. 1, 2, 3, you know, and perhaps even that's a step from what we just further on from breaking it up, where we're getting them to start take control and breaking it up. They can perhaps list the steps themselves. One of the things I
was going to say, ask for their input, because there are more than one ways to, you know, skin a carrot.
Yeah. Yep.
Just because that's the way that you do it doesn't necessarily mean it's the only way that it can be done. So you can say, this is how I would suggest you do it. I'd be welcome to talk about other ways that we could accomplish the same result if you think there's a better way for you to do it.
Yep.
And, you know, have that flexibility, because brains are different.
The kids can't have the flexibility. It's Muhammad in the mountain. You know, you have to be the responsible adult in the room. You're the one that can change. They actually can't. And so you have to be the responsible educator and move to that. Yeah. One of the things I know that kids, ADHD kids, they hear their name so often. Henry, back to task. Henry, do this. Henry, Henry. And they hate hearing their name all the time. And it also builds a reputation about them, which really isn't fair either, of being the naughty kid, when he's not really the naughty kid at all. He's the kid who's actually struggling with the executive functioning. So, you know, a thumbs up, secret message, you know, to them.
Check on the ear, rub the nose.
Yeah, maybe once upon a time it was a pat on the head or a pat on the back, or, you know, 2 knocks on the table.
Yeah.
Just to remind them. It can be really handy, or calling the person's name next to them or that's close to them as well, and using the old ripple effect, or the old description of reality too. But if you can avoid using their name all the time, they will really appreciate it.
For sure.
Frequent and timely feedback for being on task and sustaining. They just need more feedback, and they need it quicker. Yeah. My old mentor, Bob Adams, always used to say, just catch them being good. catch those steps in the right direction. And he was right. It's really that simple. Don't stop a behaviour, just encourage a new one and catch steps in the right direction.
Yeah, well, so I have a background of horseback riding. And one way that it was described to me to get the horse to do what you want them, and for them to respond negatively, like by bucking or rearing or backing up or doing whatever, you always need to leave one door open. So you can start with the openness everywhere. And if they start doing something that you don't like and you need to put one wall up, then you do that. And then you guide them as much as you have to, but you always need to have that one way open for them to escape, and make it so it's the most inviting option. Right? And it's not like you're punishing them. They're just saying, okay, well, right now I'm going to let you do the activity how you want. Okay, I've given you the assignment. It's your time to do that. And then if they're not able to get onto task and maintain the responsibility, you know, have an established set of expectations. Okay, so if you're not able to focus on get on task within the first X minutes, then I'm going to come over to you and we're going to discuss the best way, and that we're going to do that steps together to do that. And then you scaffold more and more. So you give them support. And obviously when they're first learning a new task, you can't give them complete freedom, but start removing those walls so they have more ability, and that gives them confidence. And, you know, not that learned helplessness where that I need you to be right here by my side to tell me step by step how to do this.
Dr. K, you must read my mind. You're a bit scary sometimes. I was just about to say, hang on, are we creating a situation of learned helplessness here where we're always at their beck and call? And you addressed it straight away. Wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah, and that's the thing that so many of our exceptional students develop right? Is that learned helplessness, because they're not able to do it on their own. So they get that support. And we're not strategic in our way from removing that support to help them gain those new skills and the confidence to succeed.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's something to be aware of too. It's a trap you can fall into, and teachers' aides or volunteers you might have that who have well-meaning, but end up doing a little bit too much. But it's always that balance, isn't it? Is this behaviour? Is this a learned behaviour I'm dealing with, or is this part of the disability? And I think the only thing that can really help you with that is your connection and your relationship with this child, and knowing that a true ADHD child will respond. A true diverse, neurodivergent child will respond to this. Somebody who's seeking attention for other reasons, yeah, you can tell after a while. It'll be the consistency. I suppose that comes back to, what we spoke about, consistency, frequency, and intensity. And keeping a track of those. Well done. That's great. Give visuals and verbal reminders of ending task. I think we've talked about this many times, that there's a time blindness, and that's one of the points I've got. I suppose the next 3 points are all about that, really, is that if you can make time as visual as you possibly can, with clocks, or if you can, the younger students, relate it to eating or drinking, or around recess, morning, afternoon. Give them a time reference to help them. Make time visual, use weekly planners and calendars. Look, I've got a number of senior students, and I've tried to use calendars and Google calendars, and some of them work when you're starting to break up a task into smaller parts. But I just go back to the bullet points and the bullet journal. I really think.
Yeah, you know what? I've got all the technology in the world. I have a computer science degree, and my mother laughs at me on a regular basis when she sees the size of my bullet journal. It's in the other room. I was gonna try and show it to you, but it's not small, and it's probably about the size of my iPad, but it has everything that I need, and it has that visual reminder that I need. And the other thing that I've learned over time, at least for me, I need to physically write it down to have it stick. I need that kinesthetic motion for it to register. If I type it in, it's not going to be there. And that's something that we need to also be cognizant of with our students, is making sure that the way that we're choosing to support them works best for their learning, right?
Yes.
It may work well for you as a teacher, but you cannot assume it's going to work well for them, right?
Yeah.
Everybody needs their interventions tailored to their needs, not the student before. Like you often say, when you've met someone with ADHD, you've met one person with ADHD. It's the same for any diversity. It's the same for any person, right? You've met one person, you've met one person. We need to think about interventions and supports in that matter too. Yes, there are common ones that work, but for someone that has problems, for example, today we're talking about focus and maintaining focus, you're going to have a different mix of these suggestions depending on the individual. These are all great suggestions, but every one is not going to work for every student.
Yeah. And you know what? This probably is something to look for. The older students, they might have 5 diaries or 5 journals or 15 apps. Because this one just might be the one that works.
Yes. And making sure that you only use the interventions and the supports that you need. Why, yes, they could add that little bit more, but the extra effort to have them isn't always necessary. Right? So just because, you can have several different things in place, like to break up the tasks into smaller chunks and having the note or the ordered list, and the visual planner, maybe just find out which one of those is most important and effective. And for your older students that are more used to these routines, for example, when it comes to writing a paper, they can have a pre-made guide with their step-by-step process, so they don't have to recreate every time to use it over again. They can just say, okay, I'm writing this type of essay. This is what I need to remind myself.